Welcome to the Voice Pen Purpose podcast with author and writing coach, Amy R. Brooks.
Hi, everybody. This is Amy Brooks, and we're back for another fun podcast, this time with a published author. I have with me Dominique Brightmon. He's an author, podcaster, and professional speaker from Baltimore, Maryland. His aim is to help others become better versions of themselves through reading and other forms of self-development. Thank you so much for joining me today, Dominique.
Oh, thanks so much for having me, Amy. How are you?
I'm great. I was lamenting all the woes of life in Costa Rica when it comes to technology and cars, but you're back in my hometown of Baltimore. How's everything up there?
Same old, same old. Of course, folks doing their things behind closed doors, folks doing things outside of open doors, all that good stuff.
There are lots of shifts happening in the United States right now that I'm watching from afar. So I think it's going to be interesting to talk about your book within that context. So Going North, Tips and Techniques to Advance Yourself. I'm super excited to hear all the details about why you wrote it and what influences you had. And I'm assuming that there's a lot of Baltimore and U.S. culture and people's desire to kind of get ahead and to find their purpose. So tell us a little bit about the book, actually. That would be a great starting point.
Sure. The book Going North, Tips and Techniques to Advance Yourself, it is my first book and first entry into the business of immortality known as authorship. And the book actually started as a dare back in 2015.
Ooh.
Yeah, because I was a part of Toastmasters for a couple of years, and I was rising through the ranks of district leadership, and also had a presentation / life coach at the time, and he wanted me to compile a list of my favorite books that I've loved to read because I was recommending him some books, and he was loving every single one I recommended to him, so he figured, hey, you got to share this with the world. So I created this list known as the 100 Books for Dynamic Living. And I was handing these out to people. And one lady I handed it out to at a conference, she looked at the list, then she looked back at me, looked at the list, and then looked back at me and asked me where was my book. And I was
I love that.
Yep, I was dumbfounded because at the time I was 22 and grammar / English class was my worst class in high school. So what the heck am I going to write about at the age of 22? And English was my worst subject in high school. And the funny thing was, before that, one of my buddies, Sean Purvis, he's also a author too. He would always get on my case because I would get on his case, because in his first book, he talked about a book that would be coming out shortly after the first book called Top Shelf Customer Service. But the problem is the book was written in 2009, and I picked up his book and read it in 2015, and there's still no sequel. So we saw this as the perfect opportunity to just peck at me, to make me get my book done. So I did some soul searching and declared in the Toastmasters meeting, I'm going to have my book done by November 2016. And that declaration was like the gasoline to the flames, because after I went home from the meeting, my pen was on fire. I wrote about 14 pages of content, handwritten, not typed, and it was great. But then after that, I kind of went to hibernation mode for a good 2 months and then kicked back into gear for writing again in January and was able to get it done. And Going North is a culmination of my favorite books that I've read and some of the action steps I've taken from them. So in a way, you're getting a 50-page book from a guy who has a decade of experience working in a public library and has combined some of the best books into a small 50-page tome that can help you push yourself forward.
I love that. It sounds super efficient. So what were your experiences? You know, I like that. First off, let's point out the fact that you wrote the 14 pages handwritten, and that happens a lot where people get a bolt of inspiration and they get to writing and then reality sets in, or just the opposite of that excitement, like you kind of crash a little bit. And I like to use the word hibernation. So you really go inward and you rest, and it's true, but people really beat themselves up about it when that happens. But there's got to be something on the other side of that hibernation, or else the book never gets finished. You have 14 pages. So what was your writing routine, or what normalized your writing in order to finish your project on the other side of that hibernation?
Yep. So on the other side of that hibernation, when I got back into the writing in January, what I decided to do was set aside a good 90 minutes after work, especially on weekends, to just go into my POP, my place of productivity. So a Dunkin' Donuts, a Starbucks, anywhere I can get coffee, occasionally tea, and just sit down and write without being disturbed. Because at home you may have certain distractions. I still got my PlayStation 3 that nowadays just works as a movie player, but it can work as a distraction. The laptop, it can be a distraction. So what I would do is I would actually set aside time for after work and actually write, physically pen to paper write, and then go back and type it in later. So that way I'm rewriting in my computer and I can save it for later, not to mention I get to catch some things that didn't sound good and look back and laugh at myself. It's like, oh man, what was I smoking? Heck, what wasn't I smoking when I was writing this? And just go back and just pretty it up and just cut off some of the run-on sentences and some of the bad examples and and even just resharpen sentences. So that was really the process, just setting aside the time after work and just actually writing and making sure I'm not too distracted while writing.
Yeah, I love that. I love the idea of, first off, anyone who's listening, if you feel any pressure with the blinking cursor, you get on the computer and you don't know where to start or where to write, it's great to shift your environment and to shift your medium. So to get the pen and paper, pencil and notebook or something. And sometimes I know people even grab their, although it can be distracting, their iPad and curl up on the couch, like physically just get in a different position rather than sitting up at a desk or at a table in a coffee shop. And a lot of people I've heard have said they like the ambient noise and they like being out in public, like they really have nothing else they can do except work on their books. So that's a common theme. But the thing that really strikes me is that transferring then what you hand wrote and typing it, you're revising as you go. So your first draft becomes your second draft by the time it appears on the screen, which is brilliant. So that's a great idea for people to have your notepad on the go. And it doesn't have to be a coffee shop. You can go out in nature. You can go anywhere and just have your notebook and pen. Yeah, I think it's way more connected. I find that at the beginning of book writing, it's important to stay really connected to your words and not get too functional, which is what happens when you get on the laptop. Sometimes you get in functional mode and you get the spell check and everything kind of popping up. So, thank you for that. I really am digging that part of the process. So you have it typed up. When you were finished with was basically your second draft almost, did you feel compelled to ask other folks to look at it? Did you hire someone? What was your next step after you had everything kind of typed up in one place? And did you do that in a specific program, or was it just Microsoft Word or whatever?
Yeah, it was just Microsoft Word. Well, actually LibreOffice for those who like to do the free highway and just go open source, OpenOffice and LibreOffice. That's good, but use those to just type it in. And for the editing, I was originally going to have my professional editor do it, but at the same time, I remember promising my buddy from Morgan State, like, hey, I said he was going to be the first person to look at the finished product when it was done. And I was like, wait a second, this could actually work because my friend from Oregon, he actually got a bachelor's in screenwriting. And when it came to class, he never studied for tests or anything, and he was getting A's. So I figured, hey, I might as well have him look at it. He gave me some great advice and even helped me to look in certain places where I didn't think of. Like for example, in the beginning of the book, I also used a couple of my LinkedIn blogs as well, rewritten and polished to put in the book as well. And he also added that I should also remember to add a bit about myself and my background, because with nonfiction books, folks got to know who you are so you can have that credibility factor.
Yeah, so he was the first, and sometimes we use the term beta reader. So he kind of went through and gave you all the advice and all the things. Did you ask him any specific questions? Like, did you have him look out for any areas that you were concerned about, or did you just say here?
I basically just said here and just had to remind him to just make sure you get this done, because I got about like 3 months to go to publish this. And I don't even have a book cover yet.
No, that's a good idea. I always tell people to give a deadline because people want to help, but then it becomes this ambiguous thing like, oh, I'll get to it. But if you say to somebody, like, I need this within the next 2 weeks, or, you know, depending on how much, sometimes people give chunks too. So the idea that you gave him the whole thing, you know, that, how long did you give him? Do you remember?
Yeah, I gave him about a month to get it done, because it was around, I believe it was August 2016 when I gave it to him. And 3 weeks in, I was like, hey, how's the book coming along? Oh, I didn't look at it yet, but I got it. I was like, I kind of need that in like 3 weeks. Like, oh, okay. And he handed back to me about a good week and a half, which was great. And I was in a rush, so he offered to even sit down and talk to me about it. But I was like, you know what? I'm in a rush. You know what? I'll just make the edits and then just go ahead and put it out there. Looking back, that would be one thing I would change for the next book, is to, once the editor looks at it, looks over it, basically just talk with them and see what their thoughts is, because that can also be a way of, in a way, emboldening your own beliefs. And not only that, you can also get new ideas to strengthen your writing, because when he gave me back certain suggestions, there are some things I forgot. Like, there's a big part in the book that I like to call the New Year's mantra, where instead of having a New Year's resolution, you would basically have one word for a year. So basically for this year, I decided to make my theme focus. So that way I can focus on getting my projects done, promoting the book, getting my podcast through, marketing the book. Thank you so much, Amy, for having me on your podcast. You've helped me to fulfill my one word for the year.
Yay!
Yep, and things like that. So there was things like that I forgot that to also put in the book as well. So that was mostly it for the editing piece. He was probably I'd say one of 3 or 5 people that actually looked at the book before it actually became published.
Did the other guys give you feedback as well? The other readers?
The other readers, they really didn't give too much feedback. I was like, oh, this is great. I enjoyed it. And one guy, he was in his 40s. He's like, man, this is actually good, man. This is on your heart. You actually said some really good things in there. And it brought him back to some of his days when he was early in his business owner days, where he needed that motivation. So just stuff like that. Nothing extensive, really, from the beginning. Because that's another thing, too. I was kind of working like a ninja, per se, because I just wanted to work in the darkness and get it out, and almost be like Beyonce and just drop it on you. Like a random album that you didn't expect, because some folks I told, even my parents, when I told them I was writing a book, they didn't believe me. And then when they actually held the first proof copy in their hands, they were surprised. They're like, wait a second. Wait, you're serious? So.
Yeah. So you just did, and was that, I'm curious, because this comes up for a lot of folks. Did you want to do that because you didn't want any negativity or any doubt kind of invading your writing space? Or was it just because you wanted to get through the process once, like on super speed ninja mode?
It was kind of a combination of almost everything. With telling people, that was also another thing that helped me stay motivated. I made a list of people that I told who I was going to write a book, and that were going to be counting on me to write the book, because they said they were going to hold me to it. Oh, good. And that list made it to about good 17 to 20 people. So I was very selective in who I told about the project to, because one, I mean, folks may not care, and two, if they do care, they may not care too much at the time, or they may not be receptive to it at the time. So I was very selective in who I told, and also the positivity piece. I mean, I got to stay positive in this, because if you hear enough of one thing, especially something negative, that can kill your momentum.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So when you look back at your timeline, what would you tweak? Because I always warn folks that everything takes longer than you think it should or that you expect. So you had like a big gap there with the turnaround time for the initial edits, like the feedback. Would you tweak anything with that part of the timeline, or would you have written your draft sooner or later? Or do you feel like everything worked out probably as well as it could have?
For the first book, in terms of getting it out there, it worked as well as it could have, because when I first set out to start to write the book, I had in mind, like, hey, this is going to be a 90, 100-page book. And as I was going along, I realized this isn't going to be 90 pages. This isn't going to be 90 pages. So I'm like, you know what? Forget it. Done is better than finished. And Guy Kawasaki, the author of Enchantment, one of his rules in Art of the Start is learn to ship. And he likes to coin it as the phrase, don't worry, be crappy. Don't release crappy products, but don't worry about being crappy, because one thing is, it's better to have your product out there and get some feedback on it, as opposed to waiting for the right time for it to be perfect. Because even though it's good to sharpen your axe to cut down the tree, you don't want to be sharpening your axe so much that it falls off the darn handle. So that was probably the main thing. So I'm grateful for that. But for things I would change things I would change would be to hopefully blog more. I've done a little bit of more blogging, not as much as I would like, but I've done a bit more blogging, wrote a couple articles on medium.com. I would do more blogging, so that way I could have more fodder for the next book, because that's also another way of writing I picked up, because there's a book out there that's titled How to Blog a Book. And Tim Ferriss's book, Tools of the Titans, that giant, huge book is basically a bunch of his favorite podcast interviews from gurus in their field of expertise into a package. So you never know. We could have the Amy Brooks and the Awesome Crew book in about 5 years from now, where
I wasn't thinking that. I know Tim Ferriss's book. Yeah, it's funny. Yeah.
Yep.
Well, it's interesting where you can get content and then how it can be packaged, because some folks really like to listen. Some folks like the blog format. Other people like the book, the nonfiction versus novel. So all of these are super intriguing to me. Are you open to, because let's go back to the vein of like done is the most important thing. And like, I'm a big fan of learning the process too. So everyone's first book, like one of the goals is to have a great final product. The other goal is to just learn the process itself so that you can replicate it. You create that muscle memory. And so now that you have that, and I know we talked briefly before we went on air, so we need to delve deeper into your second book. But before we do that, would you be interested in going back to the first book and adding stories or insights that maybe didn't make the cut? It'd be a second version. It'd be updated. Like, are there any things that you look at in your final product now that you're like, ooh, I could add a chapter. I could tweak this, or that story could be developed a little bit more. Do you do that?
Oh, yes, definitely. That's going to be for the second book. I want to call it Going North on Steroids. But the problem is, well, it's not really a problem, but I'd say the thing is, I might stick to the small book route, because one of my friends who bought 10 copies for his friends who stayed clean for a good 3 weeks through a drug program, an alcohol program, he noticed that the books were small. And he's like, hey, the guys can read this. It's small. It's doable. And I was like that, and it hit me. I was like, wait a second.
Yeah.
This is the 21st century. People don't have time for 400 pages. And there'll be some folks who may not like reading because they look at a 200-page book and they're lucky if they even read the first 10 pages. So if
Yep.
they can read something nice, slim, okay, maybe the book might look a little anorexic, but it's a healthy book for your mind.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's small but powerful. So I might just stick to the small but powerful route for that one.
Yeah, so the idea of having a book you can read in one sitting, that has been a marketing tool that I've seen more and more, especially in terms of marketing and business. If you were to look at your book now and say the best thing that came out of this book or the reason why I wrote it and that reason is now actualized, what would that be? Like when you look at your book, did it help you with your business? Did it help you with your personal development, networking, future marketing or current marketing? How is your book serving you?
Yes, ma'am, it has. It has served me in ways I could not imagine. Once again, this
Mm.
podcast being one of them. Thanks again. And also the fact that it helped me to go back and actually manifest something that was in my mind for about 5 years now before the book even came. As folks have been telling me for years, I have this radio voice, and in 2012, I
Mm-hmm.
had the idea, it's like maybe I should do a podcast, and it just lingered in my subconscious mind for a very long time. And then a few months after the book was published, I decided to launch a podcast called The Going North Podcast, because I mean, hey, I like inspiring people, I love positivity, and authors always love the opportunity just to share their voice with the world and just share their works with the world. So that way has helped me to not only advance myself, but also to advance others. And another thing
Mm-hmm.
I've noticed is that folks will surprise you with random notes of encouragement, and it will show that they've been quote unquote stalking you because this one
Mm-hmm.
guy talks about how his book was done, but he just needed to send it to an editor. And the book was probably done 4 years ago, and he finally released his book. So, in a way, for those out there who are
Mm.
waiting for that perfect moment to just get your book out there is no perfect moment because time's not promised to anyone and life is shorter than a 3 foot tall person. You gotta get your book out there because
Mm-hmm.
you never know who you can inspire just by releasing your work, especially if it's good. If it's good, that just makes it even better because someone will finally get the confidence to release their content, their material, and they can be like, hey, thanks. Now I can finally go out there and do my thing too. So that was just a few of the great ways that releasing the book has just helped me.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome. I mean, that's my whole business model. So in a nutshell, it's just really stepping into your voice and your purpose. And by just living your own truth, that's going to naturally inspire others. You don't have to go out and necessarily give a motivational speech. When you're living in a way that motivates others, that's even more authentic than just telling people to do. You're showing them that you did it and that you're really enjoying the process too. That's what I want to emphasize from what I heard today as well is that it wasn't just the final product. There were lots of steps along the way that you learned and grew and developed. What were some of the things that you learned about yourself through this whole writing process that maybe surprised you, you didn't see coming?
I learned that I really, really love coffee. That's one thing I
Mm-hmm.
learned.
You mentioned the coffee shop, so I was like, oh, that's his fuel. If you can figure out, and you know, it's funny, Dominique, I tell people all the time, you need to have carrots and sticks. So I like having some built-in consequences and deadlines for myself, but I also really like rewards. And sometimes the reward is like a walk. Other times it's coffee, and I don't make it expensive. It's like lots of little things that I like. And if you're in your happy place, drinking your coffee, writing, it's freaking delightful. I love it.
Yes, it's delightful and delicious.
Mm-hmm. So that was your fuel. Anything else that you learned about yourself through this process that you just didn't realize, but the writing process, the book development really brought it out of you in a way that no other situation has?
It's also the book itself, just the process. It also taught me the fact that, or at least it just re-ingrained the lesson of, hey, that growth is happening. Because
Mm.
even now when sharing some picture quotes of stuff from inside the book, I look back and it's like, wow, actually wrote this.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost in a way of listening to a speech I've done recently and then going back 2 years into the past and it's like, oh God, I hated that speech. It's like,
Oh.
yeah, it's like at the time you really love it, but then down the road you see how much you've grown and then you realize, oh my gosh, wow, it's
Mm-hmm.
like, wow, it's like you think you're really good at the time, but then when you go down the line and you realize, hey, I'm actually making progress, it's a great thing because it just gives you that reinforcement like, hey, I'm learning and I'm still growing. It's a wonderful thing. It just reinforces the fact that, hey, every day in every way I'm getting better and better and just being intentional about it. And also learning the fact that, so, and also learning the fact that you can set a schedule and it's very good, but also when it comes to writing, you don't have to write every day because it kind of goes back to the beginning with the hibernation thing. Because I remember
Mm-hmm.
there was one speaker, I believe Dennis Kimbrough, he said, if you want to be a writer, you have to write every day. Every day. I was like, I didn't write every day. It was in just short bursts. Of course, the
Mm-hmm.
14 pages at the start, then the 2 months of hibernation, then did the month where wrote out a few pages and then it just died off a bit. Of course, did some writing almost every weekend, but also did some reading too and almost like no page of writing. There was maybe a paragraph or two. So there are some days where the writing happened, but it just wasn't in abundance. So it's also learning the fact that you don't have to write every day to get your book done, but you do have to write.
Mm-hmm. I like the idea of taking breaks and living life. And then on the flip side, in terms of writing every day, I'm with you. I can't work on, I've juggled multiple books at a time for myself and other people. Still need to take breaks. Like it cannot be 7 days a week. But the one thing I've given myself permission to do is write in different forms. So process journaling, where you're just kind of journaling about your writing experience, or Facebook, making a post about the book that you're developing, or just going not out of character, but like not in alignment with the book you're writing, and like really having fun playing around with words in different spaces. Because the worst thing, and I want to see if you agree with me on this, worst thing is like for your book to become work and to be really kind of an energy drain. So to keep it fresh, to take the breaks, to do other things is important to me. Did you find like your book ever became like a job, like work, like, I got to finish this book? Or were you able to keep a really nice energy exchange with this project?
I say at the project, it was a good amount of energy because again with the deadline thing, of course I wanted to have the book done within a year, but I wanted to try to surprise some people a few months earlier. So just being grateful with the process and realizing that, hey, it's better to just get it out there. Now, of course, there are some times where I did feel the pressure, but it really didn't feel like work, if that makes any sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, pressure. That's a good point. So pressure, but not work. I like that. Yeah, pressure sounds a little bit intimidating because it is, but work sounds like a slog. Like, I gotta go to work.
It's like, yeah, let me press the snooze button right here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I like that balance, because you want to have, I personally need some extrinsic motivation, or like you were saying, accountability when you told people. So yeah, that's an interesting concept. I'm gonna think about that some more. Like the idea of appreciating a deadline and feeling some level of pressure, but not so much that you shut down or you quit. So I do like the balancing act. But I get very nervous when people are like, oh, it's going to be sunshine and rainbows. It's going to be fun every day. I'm going to love it. And see, you're laughing because that's like not, and you're like, oh, you're going to quit like so soon because you're training for a marathon or running a marathon. Like, yeah, it's great to run around the block, but like once you hit mile 10, the marathon, I'm just pretending. But like once you hit mile 10 or 15, like you're going to have to persevere. You're going to have to really dig deep and remember your end goal.
That's right. Begin with the end in mind.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm excited for your new, can you tell us anything about your new book before we go? The book that's coming out next year?
Yes, ma'am. The book is going to be released October 2018. There's no set date within the month of October. We'll just go with October, fall, pumpkin spice, nice cozy. It's going to be another self-help book. I have a few ideas working around in my head, but we'll see what actually manifests out of those ideas. But right now, the idea is to release, almost re-release the Going North project, but quote unquote on steroids, with more stories and more things that weren't mentioned in the first book, to give folks a deeper dive into self-development, and of course with the struggles that you have to deal with when you complete projects and you reach a new level. Because there's a phrase out there that I've heard about recently. I love it. It says that when you reach new levels, there's going to be new devils. So it's like you gotta make sure you realize that you keep up with keeping forward, because what got you to a certain place may not keep you going to the next place where you need to be.
Yep. Yeah. So that's going to be really great follow up. Like is it almost 2 years from the first book coming out? So 16, right? 2016 and then 2018.
Yep. Going North is going to have a brother or sister.
Oh, that's adorable. I love it. Yeah, and that's a marketing technique too for anybody who's listening. The idea of having multiple books like in the same genre, on the same vein, that you can market together. You know, to have a sequel, follow up, or to have a trilogy, or have some sort of grouping. It really makes sense to people. So after they finish Dominique's first book, if he does any kind of connection and promo, they're going to get super excited about a second book. They'll ask like, what's next? And it gets some momentum going within your reading circles. So that's exciting. So much for coming on today and sharing all this. I think that anybody listening is going to get lots of insight as to what the process can look like, timeline. Like I really liked all of the tips you gave about where and when to write, giving yourself breaks. The publishing process I thought was really interesting. So any final thoughts for us that we didn't cover? I'm trying to think if there's anything else I can ask you, because I got a lot of good info.
Oh yeah, I could probably add to the ambient noise piece from earlier. I'm a big music guy. So Lupe Fiasco, Paul Hardcastle, and a couple other unknown folks. Of course, there's Nujabes, Japanese hip-hop DJ who actually passed away about 7 years ago, but his music is very timely. Just folks like those. I would also play music like that while I'm writing as well. Heck, even channel some professional wrestling thoughts like Shawn Michaels, The Rock, even channel some promos at that time as well, for moments where it's like, hey, when you're down, be like, hey, gotta kick back up and know my role, and actually like shut out the noise and just get down and write. So playing music in the background is also a great way, just keeping headphones, so that way you can also not be disturbed too much in public too, but keep one ear open, because you don't want to be completely shut off from reality when you're out in the public, because you might have to defend yourself. You never know.
That sounds super adventurous. You never know when you might have to defend yourself. You know, I was, as you were saying that, I was thinking this would make a great blog post where you just gave a list of the music and suggestions on how to get into a writing practice. So for your next Medium post, I think it would be super interesting to how to create a writing zone, or what did you call it earlier? You had an acronym, like a personal space or productivity.
Oh, yes. That's out of chapter 7 of the book Going North with Focus. It talks about your POP, your place of productivity.
I want you to write a blog post about that and talk about the music and where you are in that chapter, and then tie it back to your book. Please.
Done.
Okay. Yes. Because that was a lot of good information, like with specific music. And I find that when I tell people, oh, listen to meditation or something, you go to bed, if you have sleep issues, they're like, okay. I'm like, let me send you a link. Let me get you started. So if you can get people started with a playlist, I feel like it's super generous and a concrete action step for them to take. They can like just Google it or click on a link or whatever. And in your blog, you can even embed it. So that would be super cool. Thank you, Dominique, for coming on today.
Oh, thanks again for having me. You are awesome.
You're awesome. Everybody's awesome. All right, guys, if you're out there, I want you to be like Dominique and really consider how you can show up with your voice as authentic as possible. Grab that pen and step deeper into your purpose. If you want any more information about any programs or retreats down here in Costa Rica that I offer, just head over to voicepenpurpose.com. And until next time, write on.